3 a.m. city murmurs, sirens, hums, distant shouts, mirrored faces in digital and concrete halls. Each one reflected a world we've learned to look through. 1. The algorithm of isolation. I opened my phone. 312 people had wished me a happy birthday last week. Confetti animations, gift balloons, a dozen "we should catch up soon" messages that evaporated on delivery. Yet no one knew I'd been laid off. No one had seen me cry in the shower that morning. No one asked why I hadn't posted in 11 days. The feed was a river of curated joy. Engagements in Santorini, newborns in Kashmir, promotions framed with champagne flutes. My ex-boyfriend had just bought a house. A college roommate I haven't spoken to in years announced her third book deal. Everyone was thriving. Everyone except me, or so the algorithm wanted me to believe. But here's the thing. They weren't thriving either. They were just better at cropping the frame. The first disturbing reality is that we are lonelier than ever in the most hyper-connected age in human history. The numbers are staggering. A third of adults report chronic loneliness. Teen suicide rates have climbed in lockstep with smartphone adoption. We have more friends than ever and fewer people who know our middle name. Technology promised to collapse distance. Instead, it flattened intimacy into a thumbs-up icon. We text instead of call. We react instead of respond. We ghost instead of grieve. I scrolled until my thumb ached, surrounded by a crowd of ghosts. At the bottom of the screen, a notification. Your friend posted for the first time in a while. See what you've missed. I clicked. It was an obituary. 2. The poverty premium. Hungry, genuinely. Stomach-clenching hungry. I left my apartment and walked 7 blocks to the corner market. Not the nice one with the kombucha taps and organic kale. The one with the flickering fluorescent light and the security camera pointed directly at the candy aisle. On the shelf, a large bag of rice. 20 pounds, $12. A good deal, an efficient deal. The kind of deal that makes sense if you have pantry space, a car to carry it, and $12 to spare today. Next to it, the small bag. 2 pounds. $6. $6 for 2 pounds. $12 for 20 pounds. The math is simple. The small bag cost twice as much per pound, but I had $7.34 in my checking account until next Thursday. I couldn't afford the large bag, so I paid the poor tax. The second reality is that being broke is expensive. We have built an economy that penalizes scarcity at every turn. Overdraft fees, $35 to be short by $5. Payday loans, 400% annual interest. Rent-to-own furniture, 3 times the retail price. Late fees on bills. Higher insurance premiums for people with imperfect credit. The list is endless and cruel. The woman at the register, same woman, every night. Same tired eyes scanned my rice and a single bruised apple. $7.18, she said. I paid. My New Balance. $0.16. Living the dream? A hostage note. A siren wailed, high and lonesome. I turned the corner onto 5th and saw a man sleeping on a steam grate. His coat was a sleeping bag. His shoes were wrapped in plastic grocery bags. His face was young, maybe 25, maybe 50. Poverty ages, people in dog years. A police officer stood over him, not with a blanket, not with a sandwich, with a notepad. "Sir, I need you to wake up," she said. He stirred, disoriented, mumbling. "You can't sleep here. This is private property. I'm going to have to ask you to move along, or I'll cite you for loitering." No one asked if he was cold. No one offered coffee or a shelter address or a phone call to a family member who might care. The uniform's mandate was not compassion, it was order. The third reality is that our systems have replaced care with criminalization. Across this country, mental health crises become arrests. Homelessness becomes trespassing. Addiction becomes jail time. We spend more on policing than on housing, more on prisons than on schools. The mentally ill wait in cells, not hospital beds. The hungry get citations, not meals. I watched the man stand up slowly, his joints cracking like small gunfire. He gathered his bags he owned his entire life in 2 black trash sacks and shuffled away. The officer watched him go, then got back in her cruiser and drove off to do it again somewhere else. We have built a society that manages its discomfort by locking it away, rather than healing it. The uniform isn't cruel. The mandate is. 4. The labor of invisibility. I ducked into an all-night diner, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox that hasn't worked since 2009. A woman my mother's age wiped the same section of the counter for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Her name tag read Tracy. Her hands were red and raw from the sanitizer solution. She smiled with her mouth only. "How are you?" I asked. "Living the dream," she said. Automatic. Hollow. I noticed she didn't ask me back. Tracy works 2 jobs. The diner from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. A daycare from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. She sleeps 4 hours a night, in fragments, in a studio apartment with a window that doesn't fully close. She has no sick days, no health insurance, no retirement. Her landlord just raised the rent by $200, a market adjustment, the notice said. The 4th reality is that we depend on essential workers while rendering them invisible. Tracy is not alone. The nurse who changed your father's bedpan, the janitor who scrubbed your office bathroom at midnight, the delivery driver who brought your takeout in the rain, the farm worker who picked your tomatoes for pennies per pound. 3 a.m. Packer. A hero's plight. Then, when the crisis fades, we vote against their wage increases. We question why they need handouts. We ask why they don't just work harder, as if working 80 hours a week for poverty wages is a moral failure on their part, not a structural failure on ours. Tracy poured me a cup of coffee. Black. She remembered from last time. I left a $5 bill on the counter, more than the coffee cost, less than what she deserved. She slipped it into her apron without counting it. She's learned not to expect much. 5. The comfort of willful ignorance. Back outside, the sky was doing that gray-pink thing it does before sunrise. The man from the steam grate had settled into a doorway 2 blocks down, still within view of the diner, still without shelter. A man in a clean suit emerged from a brownstone, briefcase in hand, phone already at his ear. He was walking fast, late for something important. He passed within 3 feet of the sleeping man. He did not break stride. He did not look down. He adjusted his collar, glanced at his phone, and kept walking. He didn't see a person. He saw an inconvenience, a piece of scenery he'd already decided was permanent and unsolvable. Suffering's normalized chill, but because acknowledging it would demand change. And change is expensive. Change is uncomfortable. Change might mean higher taxes, or fewer luxuries, or admitting that we've been part of the problem all along. So we look away. We call it being realistic. We say, that's just the way things are. We tell ourselves stories about personal responsibility and bootstraps and bad choices. We scroll past GoFundMe please for someone's chemotherapy. We vote against affordable housing in our neighborhood, not in the abstract. We donate $20 at Christmas and feel virtuous, then oppose the policies that would make that donation unnecessary. The true crisis isn't the broken system. The true crisis is the quiet, collective agreement not to scream, Afterward, I walked home as dawn bled over the skyline. The city was waking up. The algorithms were refreshing, curating new loneliness for new users. The poverty premiums were compounding, dollar by stolen dollar. The uniforms were patrolling, managing discomfort with citation books. The essential workers were clocking in for their second shift. And most of us, like the man in the clean suit, like me on most days, like you reading this, would choose our phones over the truth. The mirrors didn't break. But for a moment, one long, aching moment, I refused to look away. I saw the 5 faces of the world we've built, and I wondered, not for the first time, whether we have the courage to build something else. The answer, I suspect, is in what we do after we stop reading.